Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here again. I'm just going to be giving some extended thoughts regarding both philosophy and a couple other related fields, and I'm doing this primarily because of a recent encounter I had. A friend of mine, and also a subscriber of mine, had a recent encounter with a fellow who is what I would refer to as your typical YouTube atheist. And now, before I go any further on that topic, I would just like to state for the record that I differentiate between individuals within pretty much any respective group. So when I refer to someone as a typical YouTube atheist, I actually have a very specific person in mind. The kind of person that I'm thinking of is actually a person that's been described by other people subscribed to me that are also either atheists or deistic or agnostic people, such as Dr. Dissent, Eagle Eye 1975, and a few others. And this is a person that is possessed of a particular arrogance, who thinks that simply because they've come to a particular position on the God question that they are endowed with a greater knowledge in other tenuously related fields such as politics or philosophy. And you can usually spot the MO of these people because they have the usual suspects as linked channels or favorite channels on their accounts. This would be people like Thunderfoot, DPR Jones, The Amazing Atheist, Zinni, whatever the heck her name is, and Go Green 18, Zomgits Chris. I mean, it's the typical 20,000 plus attention seekers out there that I generally have nothing to do with because they don't talk about anything that I'm interested in. And that's pretty much the starting point of what I'm going to get into here, because there are a lot of assumptions that a lot of people have about other people that are predicated on misconceptions that have been put out by the people that I've just mentioned. And it creates false distinctions and false choices for people that are maybe not well researched but tend to glom onto the various points that these people make. For instance, there is a general consensus that your average biblical literalist Christian is going to look at natural disasters and say the people that died in that event were being specifically punished for something particular that they were doing or had done or whatever, completely divorcing from the equation the actual context of biblical teaching. Let's just put it that way. These are people that basically go around, as Pat Robertson always does, and reads into things via current events that are not necessarily there, even when you actually cross-reference it with the Bible. These are people that make appeals to prophecy, appeals to extraordinary revelations, and other fanatical viewpoints of theology that I look upon with a large amount of contempt, because it's embarrassing to be associated with people like that, because they are generally wrong when they make these assertions, and even when they're right, they generally tend to alienate more than they would actually educate. And so it's basically something that I tend to avoid like the plague, primarily because I view those people the same way that most non-communist atheists tend to view communists. I'm connected to them in name, but not really in much other respect. And in keeping with that, we come to the actual point that I was trying to get at earlier. The individual in question, who I am not going to name because I always give a certain anonymity to people unless they choose to reveal themselves on the video. I leave that entirely up to them. This person came onto a channel of a friend of mine and a subscriber of mine who is of almost an exact same persuasion of me, both theologically and politically. He is basically a Catholic, Christian, Libertarian, and a very strong minarchist. Now, this individual proceeded to lecture ad nauseum about how belief in a supposed omnipotent deity made it impossible to believe in the concept of human freedom, which, from a historical standpoint, is a very ignorant statement to make. There have been many people throughout history who have believed in a omnipotent and indeed a Christian version of God, and have argued viewpoints in politics that are compatible with the current libertarian viewpoint, at least as far as the American variant is concerned. People like John Calvin, John Knox, a few others. I mean, these people are viewed as authoritarian because they had a different view with regards to the rule of law and how it should apply to people. But with regards to the way government is organized, the way communities are organized, the way economic laws are figured out, you can definitely see a line of succession between people involved in covenanting churches, Reformed Presbyterian churches, certain other Reformed versions of Christianity, and indeed Augustinian variants of Catholicism, and what became the deistic camp of the Founding Fathers, and particularly people like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. They had different views with regards to theology, but if you look at philosophy of economics, if you look at political philosophy, the way everything's supposed to be organized, different branches of government, checks and balances, all of that stuff is very compatible with each other. And this comes from a certain viewpoint of human nature. And that viewpoint of human nature is one of compatibilism, and that is the belief that determinism of any kind, be it the determined will of an omnipotent God or just simply some form of metaphysical determinism that is inherent in all of the universe, is not incompatible with the idea of the human free will. Now, of course, the problem that comes into play here is that you have a number of differing definitions of what actually constitutes free will. I've provided a link in the description to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and it goes through the different points of compatibilism and its relationship with incompatibilism, which is the view of a necessary conflict between determinism and free will. Incompatibilism basically falls into two categories. It's either mechanistic determinism or hard determinism, or libertarian free will. The compatibilist viewpoint is the notion that any determinism which exists does not necessarily impede the freedom of action of existing agents, as it were, particularly reasonable and rational agents, such as what we are. And this viewpoint was actually espoused by Thomas Hobbes, who is one of the primary influences on what became the naturalist view of government and politics and what became our country. Most of the people that were involved in the founding of this country gravitated more towards Locke, but you can definitely see a correlation between the view that Hobbes had with regard to human nature, specifically the compatibilist viewpoint, and the view that Locke had. But compatibilism in and of itself is something that is largely not understood within your basic rank and file person posting here on YouTube. However, the dichotomy of incompatibilism is actually very popular amongst people that are maybe only partially versed in philosophy, if at all. And usually the terminology is different because usually the vocabulary isn't as extensive. But ultimately, what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the question of free will versus determinism is you're dealing with the notion of compatibilism versus incompatibilism. And it always breaks down to a question of what is the actual definition of free will. Now, from my standpoint, free will simply means my freedom to act absent compulsion, basically. There are basically two species of action within the compatibilist view of free will. One is me simply acting out what I desire or what I will to do. This is something that I am automatically predisposed towards. That's where the deterministic factor comes into play. My actions are a reflection of who I am, and who I am is something that is innate, something that is automatically within who I am and what I am. You could chalk it up to the human soul or to the genetic code or whatever, but basically it is who I am. I am who I am, and therefore I do what I will. The other form of action is one of compelled or compulsed action, where there is an external agent which compels me to act in something that is not necessarily in accordance with my will. And from this we can glean the general philosophy of libertarian politics, and with it we can state that there is a general agreement that compulsion is an unethical way of approaching politics, and that it is much better to maximize the freedom of the will of all individuals to the extent that it is possible. And I concur with this philosophy, and this is the philosophy of many non-theist, atheistic libertarians. These are people that I often associate with for a purpose of political discussion, and these are people who I respect on an intellectual level because they tend to know what it is they're talking about. I have very strong disagreements with people like Eagle Eye 1975 and Fringe Elements on issues such as God, salvation, the afterlife, things like that. But when it comes to what kind of government should be set up, you'll find about a 95 to 97% agreement between myself and them. And this is not in any way in contradiction with my actual religious beliefs, nor is it in real contradiction with the historic beliefs of the church that I associate with. Nonetheless, the individual in question, who was, for all intents and purposes, trolling my friend's channel, was asserting that this was all not the case, and he was doing so in a manner where there were a lot of assertions and not a lot of supporting evidence or supporting arguments for those assertions. So I proceeded to basically call bull crap on all of this. I said to the person very plainly, your arguments are not being substantiated. You're approaching this in a very childish manner, and you would essentially do well to read up on compatibilism so that you can understand why it is that there are people that profess to not only be Christians, but to be very conservative Christians who nonetheless arrive at a more libertarian viewpoint with regards to politics. There are people that are very strictly religious who are willing to decriminalize things like recreational drugs, prostitution, even cohabitation among homosexuals, provided that they are not compelled to support that stuff with their own money or to approve of it openly with their own words or whatever have you. Basically, that's the way it works. It's basically a live and let live mode. There is a certain view, a certain understanding that minds are rarely changed, and if they are, there's a certain way in which that occurs. So it's better to prioritize exactly what laws you want the government enforcing, and basically to let sleeping horses lie. The problem that I have with people like this individual is that they are not content to leave well enough alone. This is one of those situations where you actually have a strong, borderlining on militant YouTube atheist actually seeking out Christians who do not preach to other people and proceed to preach to them. You have basically the opposite of what you normally get in a theist versus atheistic debate on YouTube. You have atheists preempting any kind of a debate by actually going in and beginning to attack people that are actually not openly proselytizing to anybody else. I have zero respect for people who do this for a number of reasons. Number one, usually when it goes on, it amounts to nothing more than somebody with maybe a little bit of specialized knowledge in one topic showing off how much longer his intellectual genitalia is than the person who he's attempting to pwn. And so I proceeded to intervene in the discussion, and I made the points that I alluded to earlier, and then afterwards when I got the typical BS response where I was told you need to support your arguments anymore, and then he made a passing reference to the onus of proof, I then proceeded to point out to this person, I have made no assertion here. I have simply pointed out that your assertions are not supported by anything else that you've said or that you have pointed to. The onus is still on you because you came onto his channel and then onto my channel making assertions. And you didn't assert that God does not exist, because if that was all you were asserting, I would have simply ignored you. I don't care what you think on that subject. You made a very specific argument, though. You made the argument that determinism and free will are necessarily in conflict with each other. And I pointed you, in response to that, to some actual data which suggests that this is not a clear-cut issue by any stretch of the imagination. This has been debated for as long as we've had modern philosophy. And there is no prevailing victor within the realm of philosophy. I would argue that the compatibilistic theory makes the most sense from a standpoint of general human understanding, and it accounts for human nature much better than the notion that we are either marching automatons going around with no actual programmer, or that we're simply free radicals freewheeling through an entirely disorganized universe. I mean, most atheists that I know will assert that, contrary to their belief that there probably isn't, or most likely is not, a God, that there is still a certain organization to the universe, and they argue it from mathematical probability and through the presupposition that physics, the motion of things, has generally been constant and eternal. So, in keeping with all of this, I'm just going to state the following. I give respect to people when they come to me with an actual knowledge of a subject. I don't just go around seeking out people to be rude to. But if somebody comes to my channel, claims to be a know-it-all, and demonstrates over and over again that they clearly have no idea what they're talking about, I'm not going to show them respect. There's no reason for me to do that. So, yes, I will behave in a manner that a lot of people might think is not very Christian. I might mock you, I might make fun of you, I might call you arrogant, I might call you a dumb shit. And the reason why I'm doing that is because that's how you're coming off. So, if you want to come and have a debate with me, if you want to start something up with me, bring something to the table along with the blanket assertions. Or just don't waste my time, at least. I have other things that I want to talk about and other things that I want to do. I don't like blocking people, but I do occasionally do it when I have to. And the individual in question here, if he's actually watching this video, should take this as a warning because my patience is wearing thin. So for the rest of you watching, feel free to offer your comments or your suggestions if you wish, and I'll be sure to read them. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.